Hello, and welcome back to another episode of the Western Canon Challenge, where we are reading the entirety of the Western literary canon out loud. Today we move on to Emerson's journal collection number 21, and it starts in January of 1830. And with that said, let's go ahead and start it. Quote, "The grandest visions external could not become intellectual, but by the chemistry of those acquired from the minds of others. How far original inspiration influenced is uncertain, as how far a constant agency in harmony with the laws of mind and matter influence at all times the seeker of moral excellence." Aunt Mary. I read in Plutarch's Political Precepts that when Leo Byzantinus went to Athens to appease the dissensions in that city, when he arose to speak, he perceived that they laughed on account of the littleness of his stature. Quote, "What would you do," he exclaimed, "if you saw my wife, who scarce reaches to my knees?" And they laughing the more, he said, "Yet as little as we are, when we fall out, the city of Byzantium is not big enough to hold us." It is strange that the greatest men of the time only say what is just trembling on the lips of all thinking men. January 4th, 1830. Knowledge, even God's own attribute and delight and mean, I fear it is but cock's pearl when it is in a spirit which is not united to the Great Spirit. Quantum summus scimus. It will not do for us to dogmatize. Nothing is more untrue to nature. The meanest scholar in Christian practice may often instruct the greatest doctor both in faith and practice. I have no shame in saying I lean to this opinion, but am not sure I do not affect or pretend to instruct. Oh no, it is God working in you that instructs both you and me. I only tell how I have striven and climbed and what I have seen, that you may compare it with your own observations of the same object. It is important to have some formal observer, whether a keen-sighted one or not, in order to furnish some, and then there are two Greek words, and I do not know what they translate to, some other point to measure thought by. That man will always speak with authority who speaks his own convictions, not the knowledge of his ear or eye, such as superstitions got in conversation, or errors or truth remembered from his reading, but that which, true or false, he hath perceived in his inward eye, which therefore is true to him, true even as he tells it, and absolutely true in some element, though distorted and discolored by some disease in the soul. Omnia exeunt in mysterium. Boston, January 7th, 1830. This one begins with a French quotation, but no translation is given. A specimen, it seems to me, had I found it elsewhere, of that superficial admiration which is so common. Neither Lycurgus nor Solon need have been profound thinkers to have made their respective codes, but only practical, severe, and persevering men. Wonderful capabilities, both moral and intellectual, the formation of a code does indeed suppose, but in the general mind of man, and not in the individual. Lycurgus and Solon were alike in the dark with their contemporaries as to the extent, or the order, or the history of those capabilities, which yet their codes recognized, and common people they ruled recognized, and Degerando recognizes, and I recognize, inevitably one and all. Anaximander revives in De Stael. Anaximander said, quote, "The infinite is the principal principe of all things." Anaxagoras in Degerando is the model of the true philosopher. It is the praise of most critics that they have never failed, because they have attempted nothing. It is generous in a youthful hero who bears an unspotted shield to adventure his fame in that difficult field of metaphysics, where, from the intrinsic inaccessibilities of the positions, the strongest and the weakest assailants are brought nearly to a level, and where much may be gained by the losses of the individual. He will console himself, when he comes out smeared and baffled, with the saying of Wotan that, quote, "critics are brushers of noblemen's clothes." The Eternal hath fixed his canon against self-slaughter, shall be my answer to the Pyramist. The system of Aristotle, the labor of 1,000 years which had become the religion of the intellect of Europe, comes to be called an experiment. Some happy genius epitomizes it in a word, and that becomes its history, the algebraic x, by which it is to be designated now that its value has been evolved, and that it cannot be spared more room in the opulence of human knowledge. Repositories where it is huddled away. January 18th. I am more a Frenchman, said the Archbishop of Cambrai, than a Fenelon, and more a man than a Frenchman. This is quoted in Spence's Anecdotes to Chevalier Ramsay, who was secretary to Fenelon. The greatness of human desires is surely one element of the greatness of man. The love of the marvelous, all the fantastic theories of mystics, the deification of the faculties, etc., etc., are in that view good. Man's natural goodness is to do good to others. Remarkable what natural aids there are to this object. Love of prey strongest in strongest minds. If the tree did not bear its drupe, it would perish. If the animal did not give out its young, it would perish. If the soul do not bear its good deed, it will wither and die. It is made stronger like the animal muscles by use. If you cut off the tree's leaves, and it cannot give out its juices to the atmosphere, it dies. If you feed the horse and not work with him, he dies. A great deal of good we can't help doing. Example is inevitable. A miser and a sensualist do good by their hateful example. That's a shabby good. January 22nd. The question was debated before the association this evening, whether we were not required to abstain from amusements, innocent to us if we think them not innocent to others. The subject announced was self-denial, and the instance perpetually quoted was the theater. I think that self-denial is only one form of expression for perfection of the moral character. It means the denial of self-indulgences. It means the subordination of all the lower parts of man's nature to the higher, so that the individual doth nothing contrary to reason. Well, such a person cannot do wrong. He is that pure man to whom all things are pure. If such a person finds at any time his duty to go to the theater, he will go there unchecked by fear of what harm his example may do. It is not very likely he will ever want to go there, for any good now or in past time apparent on the stage, but if he do, he must go, nor will he do any harm. His example will never be quoted bona fide by any who go with evil intentions. His going there cannot be mistaken. A self-denier creates a moral atmosphere about him, which sanctifies and separates his actions. One part of his example interprets another part of his example. He may safely trust his virtue to bear itself out in the world. Our Savior sat with sinners, yet none ever thought of quoting him as sanctioning sin. What then may we be so free? And is nothing due to the judgments of others? No, not anything to the judgment of others, except as commentary and expositor frequently using in bringing out the true sense of our own. Not anything to the judgments of others, but much, very much more to our own than we are accustomed to give them. The true pinch of the question is that there is almost no such thing as this self-denial. It is not that men are careless of their influence on other men, but that they are careless of their own action. Chemistry began by saying it would change the baser metals into gold. By not doing that, it has done much greater things. Solon said, "He that has better iron shall have all this gold." In modern times, the best iron manufacturing nations are the most civilized and run away with all the gold. Objection to the subject of providence, that 'tis too vast for human optics. Pick up here and there a pebble contrivance, and say, "See, a god," as Newton thought. Every one of these instances valuable. 5 or 6 facts, independently of almost no value, made the discovery of America in Columbus's mind, and it took as many centuries to accumulate them. One man sees a fact and secures it, which is to him altogether frivolous, but inestimable to the race, when seen in connection with another fact not known for 100 years after. Facts seek their inventions, happy marriage of fact to fact. Sir Isaac Newton, a little before he died, said, "I don't know what I may seem to the world, but as to myself, I seem to have been only like a boy playing on the seashore, and diverting myself now and then, finding a smoother pebble, or a prettier shell than ordinary, whilst the great ocean of truth lay all undiscovered before me." February 3rd. Quote, "The greater God is, the greater we are. Homer was not grand in making his God so mean." End quote. Aunt Mary. February 10th. Is there not the sublime always in religion? I go down to the vestry, and I find a few plain men and women there, come together not to eat or drink, or get money or mirth, but drawn by a great thought. Come thither to conceive and form a connection with an infinite person. I thought it was sublime, and not mean as others suppose. Quote, "The miraculous," says Samson Reed, "is the measure of our departure from God." End quote. And Brown says to the selfsame purpose that the miraculous is no violation of the laws of nature, but a new agent interposes, dignus vindis nodus. February 11th. Emerson writes on Creeds Grow from the Structure of the Creature. Every man makes his own religion, his own God, his own charity, takes none of these from the Bible or his neighbor entire. All feel that there is something demanded by the mind stronger and wiser than itself. That is a thing essentially imperfect, that in its very structure demands more, as one half a pair of scissors, one sex, or a babe, and so every human creature makes it Jove, its Josh, its fairy, or amulet. Having got this thought well shaped and accommodated to their other knowledge, they are easy. They are stronger than before. They will do wonders. If this idea is disturbed, they are made uncomfortable, sometimes furious, sometimes depraved, sometimes dejected. Well then, it would seem that this idea is pointed at in all the structure of the animal, man. As nothing, it is discovered, is made without a meaning, no hands, no intestines, no antennae, no hair, without a distinct purpose disclosed as we study it. Well, then, is the leaning without a purpose, this inevitable, essential, natural prayer of all intelligent nature, without purpose? Is it not a finger pointing straight upwards at the Great Spirit? Then it is found that this superstition is cleansed into religion as the mind is informed. The belief in God being thus gotten, providence is the application of that belief to the government of the world, just as great or as little as in the idea of God, just such is their opinion of providence. The pagan believes in a little jealous, snarling patronage that reaches him and his family and hates everybody else. It knows a little more and does a little better than a man. One God thwarts another as man contends with man. The superstition of the fairies is the idea of a petty providence. As his knowledge enlarges, that is, as his mind applies itself to a larger piece of the universe, he sees the unbroken prevalence of laws. The grass grows in Bengal by the same order as in Massachusetts. The man of one district fears death like the man of the other, and knows what it is to love and to have and to want. Dr. Donne saith, "Encourage the catechizer as well as the curious preacher. Look so far towards your way to heaven as to the firmament, and consider there that the star by which we sail and make great voyages is none of the stars of great magnitude, but yet is none of the least neither, but a middle star. Those preachers which must save your souls are not ignorant, unlearned, extemporal men, but they are not over-curious men either. Your children are you, and your servants are you, and you do not provide for your salvation if you provide not for them who are so much yours as that they are you. No man is saved as a good man, if he be not saved as a good father and as a good master, if God have given him a family." This from 5 Sermons, page 66. February 24th. We are, by dint of self-command on one hand and omniscience on the other, as if a dead wall were built on one side of our plot of ground, and on the other it was not fenced by so much as a stake or a pin from the boundless expanse. A cunning dissimulator may shut out man's eye from so much as a glance at his thoughts, but God and all angels behold him on the spiritual side. February 26th. Whether, saith Ellen, the spirits in heaven look onward to their immortality as we on earth, or are observed in the present moment. Now here is an annotation from the editor. Because, in spite of all hope and tender care, the health of his young wife was failing, Mr. Emerson took her southward in early March, accompanied by her sister. Mr. Ware, meanwhile, had gone abroad, and all the duties of pastor and preacher devolved upon Mr. Emerson. It is probable that he had to leave Mrs. Emerson with her sister, and return to his post for a time. The poem, To Ellen at the South, was written a year earlier, April 1829, and probably also Thine Eye Still Shined. Two of her poems, The Violet and one entitled Lines Written by Ellen Louisa Tucker, were printed by Mr. Emerson in the Dial 10 years or more after her death. They are included in the centenary edition of the poems. The following lines were probably written in 1830. And Ellen, when the grey-beard years have brought us to life's evening hour, and all the crowded past appears a tiny scene of sun and shower, then, if I read the page aright, where hope, the soothsayer, reads our lot, thyself shalt own the page was bright. Well that we loved, woe had we not. When mirth is dumb and flattery's fled, and mute thy music's dearest tone, when all but love itself is dead, and all but deathless reason gone. February 28th. Hudibras says, Rhymes the rudder are of verses, with which, like ships, they steer their courses. End quote. It is not very much otherwise in preaching. Topics are the masters of the preacher. He cannot often write in the way he deems best and most level with life. He is obliged to humor his mind in the choice and the development of his subject. When the sermon is done, he is aware that much of it is from the purpose, and altogether it is unworthy of his conception of a good sermon. But tomorrow is Sunday. He must take this, or write worse, or have nothing. He hopes beside that parts of this discourse will reach all, and all of it touch or instruct individuals. Emerson speaks on prayer. What is prayer? It is the expression of human wishes addressed to God. What is God? The most elevated conception of character that can be conformed in the mind. It is the individual's own soul carried out to perfection. For no other deity can he conceive. He is infinite as I am finite. He is sinless as I am sinful. He is all-wise as I am all-ignorant. He is strong as I am weak. Well, now prayer is the effort of the soul to apply itself in all its length and breadth to this sovereign idea, is the attempt to bring home to the thought so grand a mind and converse with it as we converse with men. Burke said, If I borrow the aid of an equal understanding, I double my own. If of a higher I raise my own to the stature of that I contemplate. Well now, what must be the effect, judging from this plain analogy, of conversing with one who is wholly pure and benevolent, and whom we know we cannot deceive? It seems to me plain that we must grow godlike. March 3rd. Read with admiration and delight Mr. Webster's noble speech in answer to Hayne. What consciousness of political rectitude, and what confidence in his intellectual treasures must he have to enable him to take his master's tone? Mr. Channing said he had quote-unquote self-subsistence. The beauty and dignity of the spectacle he exhibits should teach men the beauty and dignity of principles. This is one that is not blown about by every wind of opinion, but has mind great enough to see the majesty of moral nature, and to apply himself in all his length and breadth to it, and magnanimously trust thereto. Wednesday night. The power that we originate outlives us, takes imposing and stable forms, and Caesar becomes a dynasty, and Luther and Calvin each a church, and Muhammad represents himself in a third of the human race. April 24th. Noah Ripley, the good deacon, is himself an affecting argument for the immortality of the soul. May 12th. It was said of Jesus that, quote, he taught as one having authority, end quote, a distinction most palpable. There are a few men in every age, I suppose, who teach thus. Stubler the Quaker, whom I saw on board the boat in Delaware Bay, was one. If Samson Reed were a talker, he were another. There is nevertheless a foolish belief among teachers that the multitude are not wise enough to discern between good manner and good matter, and that voice and rhetoric will stand instead of truth. They can tell well enough whether they have been convinced or no. The multitude suppose often that great talents are necessary to produce the elaborate harangues which they hear without emotion of consequence, and so they say, "What a fine speaker! What a good discourse!" But they will not leave any agreeable employment to go again, and never will do a single thing in consequence of having heard the discourse. But let them hear one of these God-taught preachers, and they will surrender to him. They leave their work to come again. They go home and think and talk and act as he said. Men know truth as quick as they see it. It is remarkable how this mastery shows itself in the tone that is taken, as much as in the facts that are presented. A tone of authority cannot be taken without truths of authority. It is impossible to mimic it. There is no favoritism in the public. Buckminster had it. Greenwood has it in some measure. F.M. has not a particle. It proceeds directly from the perception of principles. Dr. Johnson was one. Brookline, June 7th. Conversion from a moral to a religious character is like day after twilight. The orb of the earth is lighted brighter and brighter as it turns, until at last there is a particular moment when the eye sees the sun, and so when the soul perceives God. Every man contemplates an angel in his future self. Brookline, June 2nd, 1830. What value would belong to every man if everyone literally told his own impressions from all he saw, and by the use of his conscience kept himself in the state of an observer? Emerson speaks on dual consciousness. Dr. Channing spoke to me of a Frenchman who had written that there were two souls in the human body, one which never suspended its action and had the care of what we call the involuntary motions, and was, in short, a gentleman who knew a good deal of natural magic, antipathies, instincts, divination, and the like, and the other, the vulgar, waking, practical soul. Well, this theory, like all others, is founded on one glimpse of truth by a cross light. And such an intelligence is there in all men, that knows when men speak in simplicity, and when they speak conventionally. But observe, simplicity of character is not enough of itself. All country people have it in great measures. It needs also a tender conscience, which shall lead men to improve themselves, to keep the ear and soul open to receive truth, and then this straightforwardness shall make them act and utter the truth. Emerson speaks on the year. The year is long enough for all that is to be done in it. The flowers blow, the fruit ripens, and every species of animals is satisfied and attains its perfection, but man does not. Man has seen more than he has had time to do. What it means to be one with God. Emerson speaks on solitude. Go sit alone, for the nations are a handful compared with what amount of being for whom the soul consults when she reasons of virtue, and see what you can hope to be that is highest and best. See how goodness is the way to wisdom, and wisdom is the way to goodness. See how the soul, in the infinite vista of the future, foresees the hour when it shall desire nothing wrong, and therefore nothing false, when, desiring everything right, and everything right being done it, shall find that insensibly it beats pulse for pulse with the heart of nature, that all its volitions are followed by instant effects, that it is united to God. Is there any hiding of the character of an apple tree, or of a geranium, or of an oar, or of a horse, or of a man? A man is known by the books he reads, by the company he keeps, by the praise he gives, by his dress, by his tastes, by his distastes, by the stories he tells, by his gait, by the motion of his eye, by the look of his house, of his chamber. For nothing on earth is solitary, but everything hath affinities infinite. Brookline, July 15th. There is a footnote which I will read. After Mr. and Mrs. Emerson's return home in the early summer, they lived in Brookline for better air, probably boarding. Madame Emerson and Mr. Emerson's brother Charles were with them. Humility is properly the exaltation of the spirit. We are to be so humble as to be of the greatest possible service to all men. We are to be always accessible to truth, as the proud are not. Yet every sin are we to scorn with an imperial superiority. Then to keep an independence of all men, dazzling men and bad ones, how hard! It needs this great equilibrium, the relation to God which sets all right. For if we depend on him for all things, we are his children. Brookline, July 20th, 1830. Milton, Bacon, Bunyan, Scougal, Herbert, Montesquieu. These are names of good men, but what dissimilar images do they suggest to the soul? Now this is not the thought of men that to each belongs a separate nature, which must be by him cultivated as an inalienable estate. As they say, the vines failed because in America they wanted to grow Madeira wine instead of bringing out the native wines, probably equally good, of this region. So men fail as far as they leave their native moral instincts and the admiration of other characters. Let them, on the contrary, have greater confidence in the plan, yet to them unknown, which the moral architect has traced for them. The elm is a bad oak, but a beautiful elm. And the beauty of the walnut or the sycamore is not felt by comparing them with different species, but with other individuals of their own. The question arises doubtless, have we not the power to make ourselves what we will by steadfast exertions? We do not snuff a scent that is laid already. We do not grow up like a plant according to a conformation of a seed. On the contrary, it is the privilege of our nature over that of flowers and brutes that we are our own law. Brookline, July 24th. Don't say that qualities are so radical in us that the fickle man can never persevere, let him try as he will, nor the selfish man ever distribute. For on the contrary, any quality of a man may be taken advantage of to lead him to any other that is desirable. I hate steady labor from morn till night, and therefore am not a learned man, but I have an omnivorous curiosity and facility of new undertaking. In voluntary exertions to gratify it, may I not become learned and acquire the habits of steady toil? Emerson speaks on Who is Religious? It seems to me there are degrees in religion, and much is religion that is not called by that name in minds that do oppose themselves to what they call religion. A man of honor and generosity, who would rather die than speak falsely, has an aversion to religion, treats it with a degree of contempt. Now I think this man is religious in the lowest degree. What he does well, he does from his religious nature. Quote, pious beyond the intention of his thought, devout beyond the meaning of his will. End quote. He is in the right way and far more near, therefore, to God than the sensual religionist, as a cripple in the right way will beat a racer in the wrong. He is in the right way, and if he contribute all those generous sentiments in a high degree, he will continually make advancements unconsciously in a religious excellence. He thinks perchance that religion is Calvinism, and so he hates it. By and by, in consequence of his efforts at self-knowledge, his mind will revolve so far that the increasing twilight will give place to the sun, and God will appear as he is to his soul. I believe it is not a fact that is very early known to children, that the sun is the cause of the day. I am sure I was not myself acquainted with it, and while living and growing and playing in his beams, and learning, as all children do, the laws of light, I did not imagine to what I was indebted, and when first I was told, it seemed to me a thing absurd. Is not this an emblem of the irreligious hero? Brookline, August 30th, 1830. My weight is 157 pounds. August 18th. The sun shines and warms and lights us, and we have no curiosity to know why this is so. But we ask the reason of all evil, of pain and hunger, and mosquitoes and silly people. August 28th. Alai disputent, ego mirabor, said Augustine. It shall be my speech to the Calvinist and the Unitarian. September 1st, 1830. Buckminster went into the pulpit on days of deepest affliction in his parish for the loss of excellent persons, with an alacrity and cheerfulness in his countenance that would have been revolting levity in another man, and read psalms and scriptures of praise. Yet no one was offended, but all felt that the intensity of his emotion was such, and the principle on which it was founded was such, as to overmaster their private thoughts, and the mourner was carried away by the infection of his sublime joy from the consideration of his petty griefs. So does a man ask himself if his subject be unseasonable or extravagant? Let him feel that none is so unseasonable, but the force of his thinking upon it will make its excuse. Such is the intimate connection existing between all truth, that no topic can be so unusual, but a genuine teacher can show such a practical value in it as shall command your total attention, and make a mountain before your eyes out of a grain of sand. September 3rd. There are two kinds of pertinence, one to the circumstances and one to the thing itself. What has been wholly pertinent to one case, in the second and superior sense, will, I apprehend, always be found to have a degree of pertinence to every case. If the orator, as is common, attends only to the circumstantial pertinence, if he say, this man had yellow hair, large lips, long life, or he spent on his occasion $1.25, or he lived in such a street and died on such a day, the discourse will not only be of necessity wholly impertinent to any other occasion, but in my judgment will be really impertinent to the occasion for which it was made. This is a mere carcass of circumstances destitute of all life and of all use to me. But if he describe with minutest fidelity the moral portrait of the man, line for line, if he describe state of mind, the effect of temptation, and the modes of escape, the more minute his copying from the finest shades of thought in his original, the more deep and universal and permanent will the interest of the picture become. And let him change the names and read it in Chinese in a bazaar at Pekin, and he will find it as pertinent still to the human mind. So much for the doctrine, so much prosed over by pertinent preaching. September 6th. Mon ami à Concord. Footnote. Probably Mrs. Emerson had gone to visit her mother and sister at Concord, New Hampshire. She was now very delicate. Happiness or serenity. If a man be asked if he is happy on his conscience, he will not affirm it. He will feel a scruple, I apprehend, precisely like that he would feel if he were about to say that he was sinless. And is there not any condition of the human heart when it is esteemed to have reached this climax? There is one remarkable exception, the state of religious progress, when a mind that has doubted of its spiritual safety emerges from the gloom into a state of peace and says, I am happy. This is not strict language. If such a person be strictly dealt with, it will be found he has wants and imperfections yet. It is a joy and serenity, but not happiness, though I think a nearer approach to it than any other circumstances that can be named. What happiness does a man feel uneasiness about? That which comes to him almost without his exertions, or anyhow which he feels he has not earned. And as all supereminent prosperity has a degree of this want of desert, it is always dashed with this feeling. Emerson speaks on Town and Field. If a man loves the city, so will his writings love the city. And if a man loves sweet fern and roams much in the pastures, his writings will smell of it. The argument, which was not power to reach my own practice, I may well fear has not power to reach yours. September 8th. Maxima Debater Puris Reverentia. September 9th. There are some kingdoms of Europe whose whole population for ages does not possess an equal interest in history with some single minds. The history of John Locke or of Isaac Newton is far more important part of the stock of knowledge than the whole history of Poland or Hungary. Well, what of this? You accuse yourself, perhaps, before God, Poland is a greater affair than Locke. Mr. Stewart's works are like Dr. Clarke's description of the entrance of Moscow, all splendor and promise till you enter the gate, and then you look before and behind, but only cottages and shops. Judge Howe advised his pupils to make study their business, and business their amusement. September 10th. It is my purpose to methodize my days. I wish to study the Scriptures in a part of every day, that I may be able to explain them to others, and that their light may flow into my life. I wish not to be straight-laced in my own rules, but to wear them easily, and to make wisdom master of them. It is a resolving world, but God grant me persistency enough so soon as I leave Brookline and come to my books to do as I intend. Brookline, September 27th. I would have a man trust himself, believe that he has all the endowments necessary to balance each other in a perfect character, if only he will allow them all fair play. I have sometimes wished I had not some acuteness or minuteness of observation that seemed inconsistent with dignity of character. But thus to wish seems to me now to be false to oneself, to give up a tower in my castle to the enemy, which was given me as a bulwark of defense. It is a wondrous structure, this soul in me, infinitely beyond my art, to puzzle out its principle. I admire a flower, and see that each lily and aster is perfect in its kind, though different in its proportions and arrangement of petals from every other aster in the field. And shall I not believe as much of every mind? That it has its own beauty and character, and was never meant to resemble any other one? Every man has his own voice, manner, eloquence, and just as much his own sort of love and grief and imagination and action. Let him scorn to imitate any being. Let him scorn to be a secondary man. Let him fully trust his own share of God's goodness, that, correctly used, it will lead him on to perfection, which has no type yet in the universe save only in the divine mind. It seems to be true that the more exclusively idiosyncratic a man is, the more general and infinite he is, which, though it may not be very intelligible expression, means, I hope, something intelligible. And listening more intently to our own reason, we are not becoming in ordinary sense more selfish, but are departing more from what is small and falling back on truth itself and God. For it is when a man does not listen to himself, but to others, that he is depraved and misled. The great men of the world, the teachers of the race, moralists, Socrates, Bacon, Newton, Butler, and the like, were those who did not take their opinions on trust, but explored themselves, and that is the way ethics and religion were got out. September 29th. A man is invincible, be his cause great or small, an abstract principle or a petty fact, whenever he expresses the simple truth. This makes the cogency of the talk of common people and common affairs. It ought to be considered that the meanest human soul contains a model of action greater than is realized by the greatest man. Nobody can read the life of Newton or Franklin or Washington without detecting imperfections in those astonishing instances of the conduct of life. Boston, October 18th. There is very little enterprise in virtue. When men take to themselves the reproofs and exhortations of Scripture, they say, "The rule is above my whole life." The mind performs a penitential act of persevering its deficiency, but there it stops. It declares war against the enemy, but it does not levy a troop nor make an excursion into his country. It languishes in inaction, and at the end of a year or of 7 years, it is found no better, and therefore far worse than at the beginning. Far worse because the demand runs on increasing and the performance does not. It were better to keep the blood warm with virtue by some brilliant act. It is as easy and natural to move as to rest. Do a deed of charity. Persevere to the end of a harassing work. Better to give every sentiment the body of an outward action. As Johnson said, deal soberly by keeping early hours, righteously by giving alms, and godly by going early to church. Domestic virtues, Spartan early rising, etc., temperance, fasting. Newton's mode of succeeding in his study was by always thinking unto it, a general attention to a man's personal habits, the habit of being sometimes alone, the habit of reading, the habit of abstraction, in order to find out what his own opinion is, the habit of controlling his conversation, the habit of praying, of referring himself always to God. Order has a good name in the world for getting the most sweetness out of time. What follows here is a poem entitled The Nightingale's Song. The nightingale on her lonely thorn in great gardens loud complaineth, and all the woods where the sounds are born are the sphere in which she reigneth, by the empery of sound. Wide through the dew above and around the birds lie mute to his breathing flute, and lordly man must linger and think the wondrous singer. Yes, it is inarticulate sound, nor mortal wit can give it sense, and only heard a mile around, through dusky lawns and hawthorn fence. But thou, my bird of paradise. And the footnote says this unfinished poem appears to have been original. The following is stated from the Blotting Book, dated 1830, and editorial note says the following note is written on the cover. Population of USA 12,821,181 souls. Slaves 2 million. Chardon Street, October 29, 1830. It has been noticed that all a man's views are of a piece. He is a friend of liberal religion. He will probably be found a friend of free trade and of free press and of free discussion of truth. On the contrary, is he a bigot? He will contract his views of education and of politics. This will happen where interests do not incline him to either side, but the manufacturer may wish a higher protecting duty in the present circumstances, though on general questions he adheres to the liberal party of the world. The improvement that a man makes in one part of his knowledge affects every other part, as the light that shines on one object illuminates all parts of the room. All a man's conversation must be tinged by his occupations. His trade commonly furnishes his mind, and therefore his talk, with the analogies that furnish him with the most conviction, and the more natural wisdom that will give him, though increased skill or invention or extension of its process, the more will the spiritual wisdom also be augmented that he draws therefrom. Can it be then that there should not be a retribution to our actions, if thus our nature is single and feels throughout the conditions of every part? November 3rd, 1830. Is it possible for religious principle to overcome the fear of death? It is commonly overcome, as Bacon observes, by every passion and humor in turn, love, honor, revenge, fun, etc. The instances are familiar of men habitually encountering the greatest risks, sailor and soldier marching up to a battery for sixpence a day. And multitudes of the lower classes of mankind die continually with almost no exhibition of fear. In all these instances, I apprehend it is not a conquest of the fear, but a setting it aside. It is want of thought, it is a dogged attention to the facts next them, and not a consideration of the event of death. On the contrary, spiritual men exhibit not unfrequently strong apprehension, great gloom, as Dr. Johnson, at the thought of dissolution. The more delicate the structure of the mind, the stronger this emotion, I suppose, and this for two reasons. First, because such persons have more to lose in losing life, and secondly, because they are not yet spiritual enough to overcome fear. I suppose that he who lives in the daily exercise of the purest and most expanded affections especially has attained religious principles and loves to meditate on God and heaven. I suppose that life is worth to him infinitely more than it is to a sensual wretch. Life to him is a world of sweet and holy thought, and the idea of losing it is tremendous. I think, therefore, that Christianity has done much to increase the fear of death in the world by the general advance it has brought about in the cultivation of the moral powers, whilst it has yet failed to affect any large portions of society to that degree as to overcome this terror. Secondly, I firmly believe that a fuller effect of Christian principles upon our hearts will be the disappearance of the fear of death. Men doubt their immortality because they doubt the real independent being of their moral nature. They fancy the thoughts of God, of goodness, of love, of ethics generally may be visions of the mind, creations of the mind, and it and they may perish together. I suppose that the reality, the independence of this part of our nature can only appear to us by its use, that in proportion as it is brought into exercise, its eternity will be felt. I have always noticed that when I had been occupied with diligence in any ethical speculation, with the law of compensations, for example, with great conclusions that come from the analysis of the affections or any kindred question, if from the midst of such thoughts I glance at the question of immortality, I have at that time a clearer conviction of it. I have heard, moreover, a great many anecdotes of people in the last and former generation, quiet, simple people of Malden and Concord, who had no books but Bible and Psalter, and a less rational, therefore, but far more fervid piety than is common now, who died without fear, and with exultation even, in the love of Christ. I suppose, though they had neglected their minds, they had cultivated their moral power till it stood out to their minds a living soul, unaffected by any change of the body. This is true, too, of the apostles, who never speak of death as dreadful, to whom to die was gain. No man addicted to chemistry ever discovered a salt or an acid which he thought divine, nor discovered a law which he thought God. No man devoted to literary criticism ever imagined that any of the thoughts that formed his study was God. But the man who cultivated the moral powers ascended to a thought and said, "This is God. The faith is the evidence." A great deal may be learned from studying the history of the enthusiasts. They are they who have attained in different ways to this cultivation of their moral powers, and so to the perception of God. The reason why these are enthusiasts is that they have cultivated these powers alone. If they had, with them, trained all their intellectual powers, they would have been wise, devout men, Newtons, Fenelons, Channings. The enthusiast, enraptured with the splendor of his discovery, imagines that whosoever would make the same must think as he has thought. In his wanderings he has come out upon the shore of the ocean, and, astonished, he believes you must walk through the same woods, climb the same mountains, and be led by the same guide. Meantime, the wise Christian sees and rejoices in the evidence brought by so many and independent witnesses that the ocean has been discovered. The Swedenborgian thinks himself wholly different and infinitely more favored than the Quaker or the Methodist, yet is nothing more like than the mode in which they severally describe this common experience. Their likeness is greater than their difference. November 5th, 1830. When a man has got a certain point in his career of truth, he becomes conscious forevermore that he must take himself for better or for worse as his portion, that what he can get out of his plot of ground by the sweat of his brow is his meat, and though the wide universe is full of good, not a particle can he add to himself, but through his toil bestowed on this spot. It looks to him, indeed, a little spot, a poor barren possession filled with thorns, and a lurking place for adders and apes and wolves. But cultivation will work wonders. It will enlarge to his eye as it is explored. That little nook will swell to a world of light and power and love. November 10th, 1830. I thought today in reading Wayland's excellent sermon on Sunday schools that no better illustration could be to my doctrine of perseverance preached some time ago than this, that whenever a man first perceives the supposed necessity of the use of ardent spirits throughout the community to vanish in his own mind, when first he sees in his thought the custom of drinking separate itself from the idea of society, and feels for the first time satisfied that it is a thing wholly accidental and not necessary, Then the empire of intemperance receives a fatal blow. As an illustration of persistency, it should be the condition of the thought that it comes in the prosecution of the project of reform. Then, when he has got to that point, he is safe and victorious. And is not this the history of all advancement? We look at good and ill which grows together as indissolubly connected. If an improvement takes place in our own mind, we get a glimpse of an almost imperceptible line that separates the nature of the thing from the evil admixture. By a more diligent inspection, that division will farther appear, till it peels off like dead bark. This is the sense of Coleridge's urged distinction between the similar and the same. This is the merit of every reformer. One man talks of the abolition of slavery with perfect coolness, whilst all around him sneer or roar at his ludicrous benevolence. They with their sinful eyes cannot see society without slaves. He sees distinctly the difference, and knows that the crime is unnecessary. And this is the progress of every soul. What it joined before, it now severs, and sin and error are perpetually falling away from the eternal soul. All our knowledge comes in this way. It is when a man perceives the essential distinctness of his mind and his body that he is a metaphysician. It is when the sword of the Spirit doth divide his flesh and his spirit that he perceives the immortality of his soul. There is a time when a man distinguishes the idea of felicity from the idea of wealth. It is the beginning of wisdom. There is a time when a man separates God from his works by a process of his own mind, and sees clearly that matter is one thing, and the order and forms of matter another. To the matter of patriotism, remember the saying of Anaxagoras when blamed for neglecting his country, quote, "Wrong me not, my greatest care is my country," end quote, pointing to heaven. The law is a sort of God or divine man to men, being the sense of equity or conscience applied as close as men can to the action of men. Yet is it plainly impossible without prophecy to fit it to all exigencies. It is for its spirit, for this human heart that is in it, that it has our reverence. Means and ends. Goodness consists in seeking goodness for its own sake. Heaven is not something else than virtue. Truth must be sought, not farther ends, but must be the ultimate end. Prayer too finds the end in the means. The world is driving ever at ulterior ends. The wise man is content to study the present event, and to disclose a world of valuable conclusions in the facts which the vulgar are shoving aside as the mere obstacles, scaffolding steps, over which they must arrive at bread and wine. I suppose most young men had rather run in debt or tell a lie than be known by the most elegant young man of their acquaintance to have made their dinner on onions from economy. Yet this last had been the act of Epaminondas, of Scipio, of Regulus, of Socrates, of Alfred, of Sidney, of Washington, of every great gentleman, Persian, Greek, or Saxon that ever lived, and the first would have been the action of Commodus, of Chifnich, of Rochester, of Bonaparte, of Byron, of Brummel. Virtue is the only gentility. As soon as a young man is found to be incapable of virtue, he should be bound out, as Montaigne says, prentice to make mince pies in some good town, though he were son of a duke. Plotinus said as follows, quote, "The animal life is aeriform, and must be supplied with air. The eye is soliform, and must be supplied with the sun. The soul is truth-like, and must be fed with truth." End quote. November 29th. Smother no dictate of your soul, but indulge it. There are passages in the history of Jesus which to some minds seem defects in his character. Probably a more full apprehension of his history will show you these passages in a more agreeable light. Meantime, count them defects, and do not stifle your moral faculty, and force it to call what it thinks evil good. For there is no being in the universe whose integrity is so precious to you as that of your soul. November 30th, 1830. One mind may hold Europe in counterpoise, Locke and Poland. December 10th, 1830. God is the substratum of all souls. Is not that the solution of the riddle of sympathy? It is worms and flesh in us that fear or sympathize with worms and flesh, and God only within that worships God of the universe. Is it not remarked by us that always we endeavor to find ourselves in other men? All our honest conversation aims at this point, to find the conviction in him that has appeared in me. Eloquence is the universal speech. Bad stammering, vulgar talk is the issue of self in the individual. As fast as his nature rises, and truth appears, and good is sought, so fast he loses malequence in eloquence. For 'tis noticed that all eloquence is uniform, one. Everything bad is individual, idiosyncratic. Everything good is universal nature. Wrong is particular. Right is universal. It has often occurred to me that a man was a reflection of my own self. I understand his smile and his scowl. So far we go along together and have one nature. The moment I do not understand him, the moment he departs from me, I am pained, for I feel that either he is wrong or I am. As long as that difference subsists, so long will our uneasiness on that point. It is an unshaken conviction of both that both cannot be right. An injury aimed at his body is individual, or at any of his opinions of institutions, but an assault upon his truth strikes me and every man as hard as it does him. A false sentiment has no country. It makes no difference whether it was uttered in France or Germany, in Cambridge or in Newgate. Every soul to whom it comes feels the wound and resists the enemy as if it were personal to itself alone. December 11th. Internal evidence outweighs all other to the inner man. If the whole history of the New Testament had perished and its teachings remained the spirituality of Paul, the grave, considerate, unerring advice of James would take the same rank with me as they now do. I should say, as now I say, this certainly is the greatest height to which the religious principle of human nature has ever been carried, and it has the total suffrage of my soul to its truth, whether the miracle was wrought as it's pretended or not. If it had not, I should yield to Hume or any one that this, like all other miracle accounts, was probably false. As it is true, the miracle falls in with and confirms it. December 21st, 1830. When a truth is presented, it always brings its own authority, doth it not? If anyone denying Jesus should bring me more truth, I cannot help receiving it also. I do not wish to make disagreeable or impossible suppositions, but say it for the extreme case. The value of Christianity must be shown, must it not, by showing the amount of truth it has brought? I am raised by the reception of a great principle to its height, and he who communicates and applies and embodies a great principle for me is my Redeemer from the evil to which the want of it would have led me. Bacon showed the inanity of science not founded on observation, so he is the restorer of science. He has not saved my life, he has not saved my estate, but he has saved me from one error, and to that degree is he honorable in my mind. Newton showed the law of gravity, and has directed all men to what will be true and will be false touching bodies, and so has saved 1,000 errors. December 22nd, 1830. Forefathers' Day. 3 days more, Christmas. A man will make a better celebration of a holy day by clearing one principle than all the spruce and games and solemnities of Catholic or Episcopal Europe united. The pain that a commandment gives us should be more welcome than all the pleasures of sin, for 'tis a pledge and a measure of the good we are capable of the excellency of the nature, but men forget this and take it wrong. December 23rd. The simplest facts are the most awful. Is it not the noblest fact with which we are acquainted that we are capable of being addressed on moral grounds? This fact is so close to the first fact of our being that, like the circulation of the blood, or the gravity of bodies, it passes long unnoticed from the circumstance of its omnipresence. December 29th, 1830. Hydriotaphia of Sir Thomas Browne smells in every word of the sepulchre. That great antiquity, America, lay buried for thousands of years, and a large part of the earth is still in the urn unto us. A gem of the old rock. Here follows several Latin words. There's no translation for them. Quote, we, being necessitated to eye the remaining particle of futurity, are naturally constituted unto thoughts of the next world, and cannot excusably decline the consideration of that duration which maketh the pyramids pillar of snow, and all that is past a moment. End quote. Page 95. To be studied by antiquaries who we were, and to have new names given us, like many of the mummies, are cold consolations unto the students of perpetuity, even by everlasting languages. End quote. Page 96. Quote, there is no antidote against the opium of time. End quote. Authors or books quoted or referred to in journals of 1830. Thales, Anaximander, Pythagoras, Xenophanes, Anaximenes, Heraclitus, Anaxagoras, Democritus, Empedocles, Zeno, de Gerando, Histoire comparée de systèmes de philosophie, Tertullian, Life of William Penn by Clarkson, Plotinus, Shakespeare, Bacon, Donne, George Herbert, Samuel Daniel, Sir Thomas Browne, Hydriotaphia, Milton, Bunyan, Locke, Newton, Scougal, Life of God and the Soul of Man, Fenelon, Swift, Montesquieu, Spence, Anecdotes, Observations, etc., Dr. Johnson, Hume, Essays, Huber, Nouvelles Observations sur les Abeilles, Goethe, Wilhelm Meister, Carlyle's translation, Clarkson, Life of William Penn, Allison, On the Nature and Principles of Taste, Paley, Dugald Stewart, de Gerando, Systems de Philosophie, etc., Sermons of Greenwood, Buckminster, Wayland, Landor, Imaginary Conversations, Edinburgh Review, on Godwin, Sampson Reed, Growth of the Mind, Dr. Jacob Bigelow, Botany, Webster, Reply to Hayne. What follows is now the Blotting Book 4, and there is an editorial annotation here that I will read. This manuscript is hard to deal with. Begun in the autumn of 1830 and continued next year, it contains some jottings of later date. These, as far as recognized, are omitted here. The book also is a quote-unquote double-ender. There is little original matter except the hymn, but it seems to the editors well to give some notes and quotations apparently made in 1830 and 1831, when Mr. Emerson was introduced by the work of de Gerando to the philosophers of the various schools of ancient Hellas, and also through him and Antiquitol Duperon learned something of the teachings of Confucius and Zoroaster. Thus he entered on the path that years later led to the springs of religion and philosophy in the remote past of the Orient. At the same period, he was forming acquaintance through articles by Carlyle and others in Fraser's Magazine, the Foreign Review, and other sources, with the German writers, and copied passages from translations of Goethe's Wilhelm Meister, Elective Affinities, and his memoirs by Falk. Also extracts from Lessing, Schiller, Fichte, and Novalis. Always curious about advancing science, he read with interest Lee's Life of Cuvier and Sir Charles Bell on the Hand. Lastly, Walter Savage Landor's Imaginary Conversations gave him great pleasure, and he copied long extracts from them. October 27th, 1830. I begin the Histoire comparée des systèmes de philosophie par M. de Gerando. This leads me in the outset back to Bacon, De Augmentis Scientiae. Bacon thought that philosophy in the highest sense of the word, prima philosophia, was deficient, by which he meant the great principles that are true in all sciences and morals and mechanics. He said, Volume 1, page 96, quote, I see sometimes the profounder sort of wits, in handling some particular argument, will now and then draw a bucket of water out of this well, and for their present use. But the spring head thereof seemeth to me not to have been visited. End quote. By this I understand that generalization which gives the elevation to all the writings of Burke, of de Stael, and now of Sampson Reed. His definition of this philosophy is, quote, that it be a receptacle for all such profitable observations and axioms as fall not within the compass of any of the special parts of philosophy or sciences, but are more common and of a higher stage, end quote. Volume 1, page 95. Metaphysics in the advancement of learning is removed from this philosophy and confined within narrow limits, namely, first to the discovery of the form, that is the essential nature of the physical things, as the nature of whiteness, of heat, of weight, and secondly, the discovery of final causes, as why we have eyebrows, why the skin of animals are covered with hair, fur, etc. M. de Gerando has understood Lord Bacon's project of a literary history as intended to develop this highest philosophy rather by furnishing the premises than drawing the conclusion. Bacon, in speaking of natural history, proposes to have the fundamental points of the several sects and philosophies collected, so that men may see the several opinions touching the foundations of nature, not for any exact truth that can be expected in those theories, but because it will be useful to run over so many differing philosophies as so many different glosses or opinions of nature. Here follows several Latin words in parentheses. Quote, whereof it may be every one in some one point hath seen clearer than his fellows, end quote. But he expressly warns that it should, quote, be done distinctly and severally, the philosophies of every one throughout by themselves, and not by titles packed and faggoted up together as hath been done by Plutarch, end quote. Quote, for it is the harmony of a philosophy in itself which giveth it light and credence, whereas if it be singled and broken, it will seem more foreign and dissonant, end quote. It is this idea which de Gerando, in volume 3, page 113, applies to the other of the Prima Philosophia, and proposes himself to pursue, considering, quote, philosophy as the center in which the rays of light unite which direct the human mind in its different pursuits. He says further, in like manner, the ideas which compose each philosophical doctrine in particular form a body and a whole by the connection which they have in the mind of him who has conceived them. Every doctrine has then in itself its fundamental conditions which determine both the development of its details and the distinctive character of its face, so to speak, and the influence which it exerts around it, end quote. If then, continues the Baron, there are in philosophy a small number of questions which, lying at the foundation of all the rest, should exercise over them a natural influence, and which should furnish the last data necessary to their solution, if the opinions which philosophers have formed respecting this small number of primary questions ought to determine by a secret or manifest consequence the whole after course of their opinions, by fixing the direction of their ideas, if these fundamental questions, I say, could be known, enumerated, strictly defined, we should have found a simple and pure means of marking in a general manner the primary conditions, the essential characteristics of each doctrine. We might find the terms which compose one of the most important laws of the intellectual world, end quote. The first distinction that is made is that of material and work. Changes, not creation. First comes the cosmogonies. Indian, Chinese, Chaldeans, Egyptians, Phoenicians, Persians have a striking sameness in them, but all these are an intellectual offspring, no utility, mere curiosity. Next come theogonies, fruit of these, or rather their expression. For to all the great powers and changes they give a genius, or God, and presently recite the history of the world by a genealogy of gods. Then system of emanations. Idealism, a primeval theory. The Mahabharat, one of the sacred books of India, puts in the mouth of the Jacques Palak these express words, quote, the senses are nothing but the soul's instrument of action. No knowledge can come to the soul by their channel. The rule, do as you would be done by, is found in the invariable medium of the Chinese, but thrown into the third paragraph of the third chapter. So the invariable milieu begins with these promising definitions. The order established by heaven is called nature. What is conformed to nature is called law. The establishment of law in the mind is called instruction. What is pure thought? That which has for object the beginning of things. Peter Hunt's uncle, sitting by his fire in Chelmsford, asked his nephew how he knew the tongs and shovel which he handled were actually there. The Gnostics removed the sufferings of Christ from him, the aeon to the body, and there is some confused idealism in the conversation a soldier with General Fox, Sewell's History of the Quakers, Volume 1, page 85. Quote, Christ did not suffer outwardly, end quote, said Fox. The soldier asked him, quote, whether there were not Jews, chief priests, and Pilate outwardly, end quote. Idealism seems a preparation for a strictly moral life, and so skepticism seems necessary for a universal holiness. First class, the Ionian school. Thales begins the catalogue of acknowledged philosophers. He taught that, quote, water was the beginning of all things, end quote. And, quote, in the liquid or fluid state, says De Gerando, all chemical changes take place, and it is in the same state that substances unite to and identify themselves with organized bodies, end quote. Thales was the first physician opposed to metaphysicians, the Newton who called attention from speculation to experience. Next great principle of Thales, the essence of the soul is motion, and here follows some Greek words. In other words, thinks De Gerando that he, quote, taught the essence of the soul consisted in free activity, end quote. Thus we can make mouse mean mountain everywhere. De Gerando thinks that he did not make first principles mean both element and cause, but only element, for he was physic, not metaphysic, studying laws of nature and not theology, and excluding divinity by supplying second causes for all particular phenomena. He incurred the reproach common to most physical philosophers of atheism. Yet doth it appear that over all this matter he said a universal cause, and Diogenes Laertius and Plutarch give these three maxims to him. God is the oldest, for he was not made. The world is the most perfect, for it is the work of God. No action, no thought even is hid from God. Anaximander made this maxim, nothing can come of nothing, and De Gerando says that this was the pivot on which the long Greek philosophy turned. The next wondrous eruption of Anaximander was, the infinite is the beginning of all things, an infinite altogether immutable and immense. And surely such transcendentalism shows how close is the first and the last step of philosophy. Anaximenes, Hermotimus of Clazomene, Anaxagoras. Plutarch remarks, quote, that the contemporaries of Anaxagoras gave him the surname of nous, mind, because he first had disengaged it from all mixture, presented it in all its simplicity and its purity, and placed it at the summits of all being, end quote. I think this a very remarkable passage of the history of philosophy, as it casts light upon the disengagement also of the idea of God, for the greatest problem of the history of opinions is whether this idea is reasoned out or revealed. Anaxagoras taught at Athens, but is reckoned in the Ionian school because, like them, he cultivated the physical sciences. But the great merit of Anaxagoras is thus told. Whilst the system of emanations, the systems of pantheism, the opinions of the first Ionians themselves, had associated the elementary matter of all things to the first cause of all production, and thus conceived the divinity as the universal soul, the soul of the world itself as an animated whole identical in some sort with its author. Anaxagoras first detached, separated with precision and neatness, these two notions until then confounded. The universe is in his eyes an effect wholly distinct from its cause. This cause is nothing common with the rest of beings. It hath its peculiar nature. One eternal acts on the world as workman on materials. So the idea of the first cause, which until then was essentially defined by the attribute of power, was determined by Anaxagoras to receive cheaply the attribute of intelligence. De Gerondo's authorities are Aristotle, De Anima 1 and 3, Metaphysics 1 and 3, Plutarch, Pericles, and Cicero, De Natura Deorum. Until him, a plurality of gods. He first announced that the phenomena of the universe are strictly connected, that they form one whole, that one order reigns, that its unity supposes one mind which ordains it. Vide Aristotle, De Anima 1 1, Metaphysics 1 3. By banishing God from each detail, magic, genie, etc., Anaxagoras was able to make this demonstration of God over all. Superstition opposes truth. Anaxagoras said one single soul ran through all being, ordering matter, but intimately present to man. He said, moreover, that the senses were little to be trusted. Anaxagoras was a nobleman, but forsook his estate for philosophy, was friend of Phidias and Pericles, and said that his country, pointing upward, was very dear to him. Diogenes of Apollonia in Crete, another Ionian philosopher, rather went backward from Anaxagoras, confounding cause with matter. This materialism of theirs seemed to be incapacity of conceiving cause or principle, except as inherent in real substance. It was a substance of great subtlety expanded. Archelaus of Miletus also retrograded. In morals he taught Hobbism, quote, that men are born of the earth, have built cities, formed arts, made laws. The difference between just and unjust is not founded in nature, but in positive laws, end quote. Second class, the Italian school. Pythagoras taught that numbers were the principles of things, the monad one, eternal, simple, perfect, the dyad, imperfect, matter, chaos. Quote, beings are bound together by a chain of relations parallel or like those to which unite numbers. All these relations converge to one center. World forms one whole. Symmetry presides over the systems of their dependence and their connection. The Pythagoreans first gave the name, I don't know what the name is there in Greek, to the world, beauty. Their notions of God were more material than the Ionians, soul of the world again, placed him at the center. Mystics and spiritualizers were they, hierarchies of genii, much importance to dreams, predictions, and Pythagoras himself pretended to be an augur. But they bought this tribute paid to vulgar superstitions by fine notions of providence. Philolaus says, quote, we are slaves, property of the gods. They govern us, watch us, supply our wants, end quote. They first gave virtue this definition. Virtue is a harmony. Moderation, thought Pythagoras, the essential character of virtue. The empire over self to be the means of obtaining it. Inward peace is the fruit. He gave chiefly practical precepts, dietic, etc., but Iamblichus attributed this to him, quote, the love of truth and the zeal of God are the most precious present which God has been able to grant to man, end quote. Pythagorean opinions. Quote, the soul is an emanation of the divinity, a part of the soul of the world, a ray from the source of light. It comes from without into the human body as into a momentary abode. It goes out of it anew. It wanders in ethereal regions and returns to visit it. It passes into other habitations, for the soul is immortal. End quote. Quote, man has some affinity not only with gods but with animals. One mind runs through the universe. End quote. Quote, the soul breathes the representations of the images of things as a sort of air. End quote. Quote, reason contemplates all nature. It has a certain affinity with it, as light is perceived by the eye, sound by the ear, because the affinity between object and organ, so the universality of nature by reason, because of a consanguinity betwixt them. End quote. Archytas of Tarentum has left this great maxim that, quote, virtue ought to be sought for itself, end quote. Also that, quote, God is the source and means and end of all that is conformed to justice and reason, end quote. And a profound view of the double operation of the understanding. Quote, what can decompound all particulars contained in a general principle, can arrive at truth and wisdom, can, in these notions, in a sort of mirror, behold God and the series of dependent beings. Eudoxus said, quote, pleasure is the supreme good, but was a good man. Third school, Eleatic. The Eleatics asked why things are, and sought the answer in the soul only, and wished to find the essence of things. Other philosophers demanded, what is the generation of things? Xenophanes demanded, is there really any generation? Ex nihilo nihil fit, said Thales, and Xenophanes said thereof, one thing can never come from another thing. Like must produce like. Then all is eternal. Thought, said Xenophanes, is the only real substance. He gave to the universe only a phenomenal value. God is one. There cannot be but one God. He is always like himself. He cannot be conceived under the human form. He is perfect. We can't apply to him either motion or limit, but he is not immovable nor infinite, i.e., motion and limit as they belong to matter have no relation to God's attributes. Said Zeni then, not wisely distributed things into 4 elements, etc., and entitled himself to the name of a Neptunian geologist. Xenophanes said, none perceives by the senses things as they are. We must not then begin from these opinions, got we know not how, but from what is stable, from what reason discovers. In the last part of his life, he said, he could not be so happy as to know anything certainly. Whichever side he looked, all ran to unity. There was but one substance. And Sextus Empiricus has preserved these words from his poem on nature, which are as skeptical as one could desire. No man knows anything certain touching the gods, nor upon what I say upon the universal whole. None can, for if one should chance upon the truth, he could not know that he had obtained it. But opinion spread her veil over all things. But it was of the external world, and never of metaphysical truths, that he was skeptical, saith de Durando. It was idealism which he maintained. Parmenides' poem on nature, quote, thought and the object of thought are but one, end quote. These philosophers had confounded the abstract notion of being with its objective reality, and thought they could conclude from one to the other. This great mistake has misled a number of metaphysicians down to Descartes himself, says de Durando. He was the idealist of antiquity. There began from this Eleatic school the first philosophical dispute, this concerning the senses and the existence of matter. Zeno was charged with the defense of the Eleatics against the dogmatists, who relied, of course, on common sense and conscience. Heraclitus said this good thing, that, quote, a great variety of knowledge did not make wisdom, but it consisted in discovering the laws which governs all things, end quote. Quote, all nature is governed by constant laws. The phenomena themselves which appear discordant concur in the harmony of the whole. It is an accord which results from discords. Meantime all change, attraction, repulsion, end quote. Quote, the same cannot be conceived except by the same, end quote. Quote, conception cannot be except by similitude between the object and the subject, end quote. Therefore reject the testimony of the senses and hear reason. Still, he said that the senses were open canals through which we inhale the divine reason. Hence, also from this admission to the divine, he founded the authority of common sense. Quote, the judgments in which all men agree are a certain testimony of truth. That common light which enlightens all at once is only the divine reason spread through all thinking beings by an immediate effusion. End quote. Quote, the understanding represents the march of the universe, such as it has been preserved by memory. We arrive then at truth when we borrow from memory the faithful tablet of which the deposit is trusted to it. Wisdom is then accessible to all men. End quote. Virtue consists in governing the passions, wisdom in fidelity to what is true. The end of man is his own satisfaction. The body is to be used as an instrument only. Human laws receive their force from this divine law, which rules all at its touch, which triumphs over all. Hippocrates, the physician, was his disciple, an exact experimental philosopher. Hippocrates is called the result, the pride of the Eleatic school, Pythagoras of the Italian, Thales of the Ionian. Always utility gives the medal, even though philosophers are the school committee. The following is a poem entitled Hymn. There is in all the sons of men a love that in the spirit dwells, that panteth after things unseen, and tidings of the future tells. And God hath built his altar here, to keep this fire of faith alive, and set his priests in holy fear, to speak the truth, for truth to strive. And hither come the pensive train of rich and poor, of young and old, of ardent youths untouched by pain, of thoughtful maids and manhood bold. They seek a friend to speak the word, already trembling on their tongue, to touch with prophet's hand the chord which God in human hearts hath strung, to speak the plain reproof of sin that sounded in the soul before, and bid them let the angels in that knock at humble sorrow's door. Soul source of light and hope assured, O touch thy servant's lips with power, so shall he speak to us the word thyself dost give forevermore. And here is a series of quotes that I will read. Man is a microcosm. Aristotle. Knowing the heart of man is said to be the center of this world about which these revolutions of disturbances still roll, where all the aspects of misery predominate, whose strong effects are such as he must bear, being helpless to redress, and that unless above himself he can erect himself, how poor a thing is man. Samuel Daniel. The recluse hermit ofttimes more doth know of the world's inmost wheels than worldlings can. As man is of the world, the heart of man is an epitome of God's great book of creatures, and men need no further look. Donne. He is in little all the sphere. O mighty love, man is one world, and hath another to attend him. Herbert. All things are yours. St. Paul. There is a secret attraction towards all points from within us, diverging from an infinitely deep center. Novalis. What good were it for me to manufacture perfect iron, while my own breast is full of dross? What would it stead me to put properties of land in order, while I am at variance with myself? Goethe, Letter to Werner. If I wished to find some real inspiration, some profound sentiment, some just and striking reflections for my poetical compositions, I saw that I must draw them from my own bosom. Goethe's Memoirs. I, for my share, cannot understand how men have made themselves believe that God speaks to us through books and histories. The man to whom the universe does not reveal directly what relation it has to him, whose heart does not tell him what he owes himself and others, that man will scarcely learn it out of books, which generally do little more than give our errors names. Wilhelm Meister. Every one of my writings has been furnished to me by 1,000 different persons, 1,000 different things. The learned and the ignorant, the wise and the foolish, infancy and age have come in turn, generally without having the least suspicion of it, to bring me the offering of their thoughts, their faculties, their experience. Often they have sowed the harvest I have reaped. My work is that of an aggregation of beings taken from the whole of nature. It bears the name of Goethe. The smallest production of nature has the circle of its completeness within itself, and I have only need eyes to see with in order to discover the relative proportions. I am perfectly sure that within this circle, however narrow, an entirely genuine existence is enclosed. A work of art, on the other hand, has its completeness out of itself. The best lies in the idea of the artist, which he seldom or never reaches. All the rest lies in certain conventional rules, which are indeed derived from the nature of art and of mechanical processes, but still are not so easy to decipher as the laws of living nature. In works of art there is much that is traditional. The works of nature are ever a freshly uttered word of God. Goethe. The great man is he who hath nothing to fear and nothing to hope from another. It is he who, while he demonstrates the iniquity of the laws and is able to correct them, obeys them peaceably. It is he who looks on the ambitious both as weak and fraudulent. It is he who hath no disposition or occasion for any kind of deceit, no reason for being or for appearing different from what he is. It is he who can call together the most select company when it pleases him. My thoughts are my company. Landor. Character is a perfectly educated will. Novalis. The gift of bearing to be contradicted is, generally speaking, possessed only by the dead. Lessing. Here is a short annotated note from the editor. A very long extract from Goethe's Wilhelm Meister, the Wanderer on the Three True Religions, is given. Then follows from Lee's Life of Cuvier the statement of his fourfold division of the animal kingdom. Quote, there exist in nature four principal forms or general plans according to which all animals seem to have been modeled, and the ulterior divisions of which, whatever name the naturalist may apply to them, are comparatively but slight modifications, founded on the development or addition of certain parts which do not change the essence of the plan. 1. Man and animals like him. 2. Molluscous animals. 3. Insects and worms. 4. Radiated animals. Cuvier rejects the idea of a scale of beings as not founded in nature, but urges the necessity of considering each being, each group of beings by itself, and not by make abstraction of any of its affinities or any of the links which attach it either to the beings nearest to it or the most distant from it. The true method is to view each being in the midst of all the others. It shows all the radiations by which it is more or less closely linked with that immense network which constitutes organized nature. Lee's Life of Cuvier. That is the end of Emerson's collection of journal entries in Journal 21. In the next video, we will proceed, of course, to journal collection number 22, and it takes up Emerson's life in 1831 when he is age 27. Thank you for listening.